What is the worst game in your favorite video game series? If a series is running for over 30 years, chances are there are a few black sheep that even the fans of the series consider to be bad, or at least noticeably worse than the norm. For Fire Emblem, that game seems to be Fire Emblem Gaiden, the second game in the series that tried lots of new things, and according to fans, failed at most of them. What is good, everyone, and welcome back to the Backlog project, where we play through a gigantic list of games to find out which of them is worth putting onto your backlog. Got a game you'd like to see on the show? Check the description of the video to take part in our weekly poll, where you get to decide the next game I'll review. Before we start, I want to apologize for this video being a little bit late. Some of the recording equipment broke, so I had to delay the video a few days. I'll be back to schedule as soon as possible. Having just played the first Fire Emblem a few weeks ago, I gotta say I'm curious about what can be so different about this game that many people consider it the worst in the series, and some even go as far as saying that it's a spin-off, not even part of the main series at all. That being said, I still expect a solid strategy RPG that can maybe build on the foundation of the first game, but still surprise me with a few new quirks and ideas. So buckle up, soldier, cause we've got a kingdom to defend. When we ask the question, is Fire Emblem Gaiden worth putting onto your backlog? Why do I got these? This time around, there's no info on classes in the intro. Instead, we get a Star Wars-esque opening crawl on the story preceding the events of the game. Nothing too crazy or creative, but I like the more RPG-style direction they're going in here. Also, the opening theme is super cool and sets the tone, but I'm kinda missing the typical Fire Emblem theme. Though I guess at this point it wasn't really the typical theme, with it being only used in one game. On the continent of Valentia, two kingdoms, Rigel and Sophia, rule the north and south respectively. Sophians worship the Earth Mother Mila, while Rigelians worship the War Father Duma, making it pretty obvious why Rigel is the antagonist in this story and tries to expand their military might into the south. Alm, a village boy trained in the sword by his grandpa Mycen, is approached by Luca, a knight from the Liberation Force that tries to stop the Rigelian army from taking over Sophia to convince his grandfather to join and lead the Liberation Force. As Mycen refuses, Alm decides to take on his place, sweeping up his villager friends in his decision. I mean, what could go wrong with fighting a war against the military might of a whole kingdom with three friends that even start out with the class Villager? As you can see, the story this time around is much more JRPG-like, with a small group of underdogs fighting against a mighty army. But it gets even better because this game has two protagonists. Meet Celica, a priestess working in a remote island church dedicated to the goddess Mila. She also has reasons for travel, although they are much more grounded. She's worried about Mila's disappearance that threatens all life in Sophia to wither, so she goes on a pilgrimage to find their lost goddess with her own set of friends. They each meet new people on their respective journeys and even come across each other multiple times in the course of the story. The narrative has some interesting twists and turns for the time, but it's a relatively simple good versus evil story nonetheless. The visuals have been improved since the first game, especially combat animations are a lot more fluid and spectacular, with spells looking especially cool. There's also a lot more variety in the maps, with you fighting in forests, plains, caves, and even swamps. The only problem is that the combat still has a black backdrop, so you don't actually get to see your characters fight in them. Character portraits also got a noticeable facelift. No more are the days you are forced to look at the darkest depths of DeviantArt's fan art category. This time, you actually get some decent sprite work to look at when choosing your units. Well, except for Cliff. I have no idea what intelligence systems fed to Yuka Tsujiyoko between the development of these two games, but the soundtrack has gone from very good chiptunes to holy shit, is that actually NES music? Not only are the tracks way more varied, it's filled to the brim with bangers, no matter if you're fighting Rigelians, battling to survive against a zombie dragon, or just exploring the world map. The story isn't the only thing that feels more like a JRPG, and that becomes apparent the moment you start the game. You aren't put directly into battle like in Shadow Dragon, no. You get to explore Alm's village, talk to villagers, and find treasure. And what happens after your first battle? Do you go straight to the next one? Nope. There's a world map, and you get to decide where to go. The cool thing about the world map is that there are a lot of optional paths to take that will reward you with items, XP, and even new recruits. Well, kinda. It works similar to Super Mario Bros. 3's in that there are certain points you can go to that will trigger the next level, be that a fight, a town, or a dungeon. Yep, I said dungeon, because Fire Emblem Gaiden has those as well. They're just not really dungeons as you would imagine. No random battles or puzzles here, just some scripted fights and treasure, which is still a very fun distraction from the main story, but they could have done more with that concept. You usually walk through some corridors, some fights happen on the way, and at the end you find treasure, a statue to promote your units to a higher class, or fountains that 3 of your units can drink from to increase one of their stats. Combat works pretty much exactly like in Shadow Dragon. Your units are assigned a specific class with advantages and disadvantages. You move them on the map to try and eliminate every enemy unit while making sure yours stay alive, because permadeath is still a thing. Well, you do get to resurrect 1 unit per protagonist near the end of the game. But other than that, dead means dead, so don't lead your favorite waifu or husbando into an early grave by strategizing badly. There are only 2 real differences I found to the combat in the first game. First, terrain plays an even bigger role because it basically doubles your dodge rate, and the AI can and will run into any trap you set for it without a second thought by just having 1 unit in their attack range. Second, weapon durability is a thing of the past. That system has been replaced by equipment. Each unit gets 1 slot to equip an item you can find on your adventure. Those treasures you can find in dungeons or on enemies are exactly that. Weapons or rings that give your unit bonuses like higher damage, range, or automatic healing every turn. And these things can completely break the game with how unbalanced they are. Even early on in the game, you can find gear that will double your character's stat growth, gives them 5 HP every turn, or doubles their crit rate. And once you have almost all of your army stacked out in these things, you're unstoppable. However, this also means the opposite is true, and the game is considerably harder, almost unfairly so, if you don't explore everything and find these sometimes surprisingly well hidden items. Since there are no weapons for magic users, they now draw on their own life force to use it. In other words, using magic costs HP, making mages even more risky to use. They also do a lot of damage though, so it's not all bad. Also, healing classes still don't earn XP from healing, but at least they have some relatively weak offensive magic, so they can level by picking off weakened enemies and tend to be more useful on the front lines than in Shadow Dragon. The game now also features an auto battle system that I can promise you won't use because it's crap. It basically pits AI against AI in a desperate battle to see who can play the game worse. And your AI usually loses because maps are often heavily tipped in the opponent's favor. Which brings me to my biggest gripe about this game. Not only are the maps often very unfairly skewed, most of the time they're also shit. Placing enemies in a fort to storm from the outside is one thing, but placing archers and mages in long corridors that are only accessible from the north, with you approaching from the south, and having to deal with their barrage all the way up without being able to properly defend yourself, much less kill the enemies, is just not fun. And this is just one of the many examples of the developers mistaking unfair for challenging. Maps also often split your army into multiple little segments, which can often destroy your strategy from the get-go because you have no idea where your units will be placed before actually starting a fight. I often found myself with all my slow knights starting far away from the actual battle, or my healers and mages starting the fight in the middle of it. An option to choose your force's position before engaging would really help out a lot here, but it still wouldn't fix the horrendous level design of most chapters. Gaiden also, like its predecessor, doesn't feature any sort of pre-battle screen or other information that is vital for deciding on your next move. However, this game is a lot harder than the first Fire Emblem, and especially in the later chapters, it's not rare for an enemy to be strong enough to kill even your best units in a one-on-one fight, and without knowing that, your only choice is to either cut your losses or restart the chapter. If this was a, hey, sometimes you just have bad luck situation, it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But this happens all the time. I had to restart some chapters upwards of 10 times without even altering my strategy. I just had the game work against me so much that I didn't have any other choice but to restart and hope to hit more or get hit less. Is Fire Emblem Gaiden the black sheep? The game that shouldn't even be counted as a mainline title and no one should play? No, not really. It's still very much a Fire Emblem game, just with a few more RPG elements and a bit less strategy, especially if you find all of the overpowered items. It's definitely an experimental title that can be quite frustrating, especially towards the end. But it can also be very rewarding when you finally pull off that win, or you just get all the best items and plow through the game in God mode if that's your jam. Either way, it's a game for a specific niche of strategy and or JRPG fan with a high tolerance for pain. But if you fit that niche, you'll definitely have a good time with it. And if you don't, at least listen to the soundtrack, it's really good. What are your thoughts on Fire Emblem Gaiden? Have you ever had access to this Japan-exclusive title, or you've always been curious about this weird take on the Fire Emblem formula? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review and want to help me appease to the mighty YouTube algorithm and also spread this video to a few more people, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps out. Thank you. I'm also live on YouTube every Monday and Friday, so feel free to come by and say hi. Thank you very much for watching, and remember to always keep that backlog rolling.